Hey everybody, how's it going? Man, hope you're having a fantastic day today. And let's rejoice and be glad. It's the day the Lord has made, and I hope you are having a blessed day. You know, one of the most controversial passages in all of Scripture is Genesis chapter 22. And I got to be careful with my language here, because of our modern day, TikTok and Facebook and all of them listen for words in their algorithm. And so I'm going to try to be as careful as I can with this. And so some of this is going to sound maybe a little strange, and it's not the normal way I would talk, but I don't want this banned because it's so good. And I want you to hear it and listen to what God has to say in the message that he has here. Now, God in Genesis chapter 22 asked Abraham to take his son to a mountain and find a place there on that mountain and worship him. And how God wanted Abraham to worship him was to sacrifice his son. And so Abraham goes and does what God calls him. Now, we in our modern time look at that and think to ourselves, wow, there's just no way I would ever even consider something like that. What kind of God would ask us to go and sacrifice our own children? I mean, it just seems crazy to us that he would do that. And so, my phone was ringing. And so, we look at that, and I've been questioned on that many, many times. So one thing you have to understand, and I want you to put this in context, and this never happened in now the Jewish nation hadn't started yet with Abraham. It just started with Abraham. Abraham is the father of the Jewish nation. He's also the father of the Islamic nation also, and which is kind of ironic and interesting to think about as you think about that. The two sons went off and became bitter enemies, and they've been bitter enemies all these thousands of years. And so, but God asked Abraham to go do this. Now, in that day and in that time, this was not uncommon. This was something that pagan religions that lived around where Abraham lived there in Canaan were doing. The Canaanites were doing this. The Amorites were doing this, and Moabites were doing this. And so they would offer these sacrifices to the gods to try and to appease the god. And so people were familiar with this in that time. So it wasn't uncommon to do something like this in that day and time. And so when God asked Abraham to do this, maybe Abraham, and of course there's no scripture, that we go by, but God asked Abraham to do this, and Abraham was just going to be obedient to the Lord because this is what the Lord asked. But of course we know that if you follow that, and it turns out, how does it turn out? God provides a ram that is stuck in the bushes. And so we can look back at that and understand that don't be mad at God because he asked Abraham to do this. You have to understand the context of the place. And so it wasn't uncommon. It wasn't an uncommon thing to do. But what he did ask Abraham to do was to test his faith. And what is so fascinating about this is that God tests our faith all the time. Now, he doesn't ask us to go out because we would just, we would balk at that in a second. But he has other things that he wants us to do. And, God speaks to our hearts, and he calls us to go, maybe teach a Sunday school class. And God says, and we think to ourselves, oh my gosh, how can I ever do that? Maybe pray out loud. Maybe maybe talk to your neighbor about coming to church, and we think to ourselves, wow, God, I can't do that. That's what preachers do. And so God takes us as we grow in him, and he brings us to a place where he wants us to grow. And God tests our faith all the time. And I love what Experiencing God, the famous book it just really had a huge impact on my life. So God's always at work around us, and God is always asking us to step out on faith and go. He calls it a crisis of belief in that book, and to test our faith and to see if we're going to do the very thing that God has called us to do. And so like Abraham, God was testing his faith. And so like what God does with us, he tests our faith, and it's our job. It is our responsibility to answer that call and step out on that faith and say, God, here am I, send me. It's the hardest prayer to ever pray. I mean, you know, when you pray that prayer, you're saying, because that's what Abraham said to God, God, here am I, send me. And man, it was just, you know, it's a powerful lesson. And of course, God provided the sacrifice. And as we step out on faith and follow God's will, God will provide every need, every issue, every obstacle that we face. And the obstacles that we face in life are what? Our character building steps of faith that we're taking through that obstacle. And God uses those to teach us with. And so today, if you're facing a challenge, a struggle, or whatever it is, ask yourself this question. God, are you trying to show me something? Are you teaching me something? Are you testing my faith? And I think you'll find that God probably is doing just that very thing. All right, that's good. See you next time. Bye. Hope that helped you. Man, I just love that lesson today. See you next time.